Kevin's been in the fishing game a long time, probably boats and boat kayaks, right? And then, but I've known him as a kayak fisherman. By the way, we were out one day fishing, and I said, "Hey, I went to high school with a Kevin Workman." He goes, "Oh yeah, that's my dad. I played football with his dad in high school and didn't even know it for a long time." And he told me, so it's kind of cool. But Kevin's a renowned kayak fisherman, kayak angler nationwide, one of the best there is in the game. And he's going to talk about positioning your kayak or your boat or whatever for fishing. And if you have any questions afterward, feel free to ask him. And we have a lot more speakers today and a panel discussion as well if you're around. And remember, a raffle every hour for you, so enjoy Kevin Workman's presentation here.
Hi there. Marty asked me to come speak, and he asked me what topic I wanted to speak about. So I tried to think of something that might be overlooked but is pretty crucial and critical to having success kayak fishing. And as kayak fishermen, a lot of us have come straight from casting off the bank into a kayak. I came from fishing in a bass boat to a kayak because I like the kayak more. And you learn things from fishing in a boat that are important in kayak fishing that you don't think about when you get out there offshore. And one of those things is the position of your kayak while you're fishing. It's easy to get out on the water and just start casting at targets or working your way down the shoreline and looking for different cover and objects to throw your bait at. And a lot of guys, even in tournaments, that's kind of their mantra. They get out there, they hit the bank, and they start going along and fishing. And one thing that will make a huge difference immediately in your fishing is considering how the fish are set up along those banks that you're fishing or on offshore structure, or if you're fishing in a river. You need to be visualizing as you're moving along what those fish look like under the water, where they're at, what they're doing, and how they're positioning on cover. And having an understanding of the fish and how they position themselves will give you a better idea of how you should be positioning your kayak and how you should go about fishing a shoreline or fishing offshore structure or whatever it is. The fish are always going to be set up a certain way on different objects. And one of the biggest things they relate to is current, whether that current is generated by moving water for a river system or a creek that's flowing into the lake, or whether it's just wind current. Fish relate to this all the time. This is one of the biggest factors that they relate to when they're setting up to feed or even setting up on a piece of cover. Most of the time they're going to be facing into the wind. If you're fishing a bank where the wind is blowing into the bank, a lot of times they're going to be in the structure looking out into the wind, waiting for something to move over their heads, and they'll come up and feed on that. Other times when the wind is crashing into the bank, they're going to be facing the bank, looking for stuff to get stirred up out of the rocks, like crawdads. Anything that gets jostled loose from the rocks, they'll come in there and pin it against the rocks and hit it. So when you're working a bank and you got wind crashing into the rocks or into a wooded shoreline or anything, you have not only a better chance of getting a bite because those fish are going to be more likely to be actively feeding because of the current present there, and you'll also be able to make a better cast if you're thinking about what those fish are doing, where they're positioning themselves, and then experimenting a little bit with that. In the kayak, it's very important to consider these things because you have to position yourself to make the right cast, especially if you're fishing in a competitive tournament situation. You don't want to just blow by a spot, cast to it, you're making the wrong angle of cast to those fish and you're not getting bit, but they're there. Then you pass by those fish and the guy behind you catches them. So you gotta be thinking constantly as you're moving, like, where are the fish in this scenario? Where should I set up my kayak to make that best cast before you just start casting? Because if you're throwing a lure at a fish at the wrong angle, you could draw it off of its cover and it's not gonna bite. You could draw it close to your kayak where it sees you, and then you're not gonna get that fish at all, or that school of fish or whatever you're dealing with in that scenario. So thinking about these things as you move along, if you're fishing in a river and you're seeing a log in the water, where's that fish going to be positioned on that log? He's going to be in the shadow, he's going to be in the current, the down current side of that log where he can get a little break from that current. He's going to be waiting for something to come by him from upstream. So if you're fishing in a river in that situation, you see the log, you're floating down the stream, you're doing a float, you want to turn your kayak around before you ever take a cast. Face into the stream, cast up past that log, bring your lure past it in a position where the fish is going to be looking to feed, and you're going to have a much better chance of getting a bite. So these are all things that you need to be considering no matter what situation you're fishing in. I have a really good example of this, and I was fishing a tournament out at Kentucky Lake on the Tennessee River, and I was fishing out on the main river where two creek channels came together and they formed a shell bed in between those creek channels. And if I was casting with the current and bringing my lure across that shell bed, as soon as it hit that shell bed and popped up over it, the bass would bite it. There was a huge school of big bass there, and every single cast that you make at that angle, you would catch a huge bass. If you cast at any other angle or you went around it and cast it to them from the other side, they would not react to your bait. They wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't catch anything. You wouldn't even know they were there. But that's generally the case every time you go fishing. There's always going to be a way that those fish are positioning and set up. And another thing to consider is exposing yourself in the kayak to the fish. Thinking about how they're set up in cover and saying, hey, is my shadow going to be hitting these fish if I cast from this position? Am my presence going to be known because of how close I am to these fish? Am I dropping things in the bottom of my kayak in a close range scenario that's tipping these fish off and making them spooky because of my presence? These are also things to consider when you're considering fish position and how to position your kayak. Most of the time, you want to stay as far away from the fish as you can. Try to approach them from the angle that you think they're going to be positioned at. And then if you catch a fish, move off of that area, backpedal, paddle backwards, motor backwards, whatever you do, to stay off of those fish, especially like in a tournament fishing scenario. Generally speaking, if you catch a fish somewhere, there's a reason that fish is there. It's either next to deeper water, it's a travel ditch or a route for them to move. It's just a place that holds good cover and bait. Fish relate to certain areas for specific reasons. So if you catch a fish in an area, there's very likely to be other fish near that area or in that exact same spot. So in tournament fishing, every single bite counts, right? So you catch a fish, you need to move off, think about where that fish was positioned, how you caught it, measure your fish, get back to that area without spooking any more fish, and then try to pluck another one off. Relative to that as well is if you're fishing along and you see a piece of cover, you see a main lake point coming out, you don't want to take the juiciest cast first, because if there's multiple fish spread out over this point, you're going to draw all the fish off. You're going to catch the most aggressive one, but then you're going to have trouble catching the other fish. So what you want to do is you want to fish the outsides of your point, fish the inside corner, fish the deep outside edge, and then work your way up to where the prime area on the point is. Once again, fishing a point, when you're approaching it, no matter what direction you're approaching it from, look at the current, make sure you understand if there's moving water in that water system, like which way it's moving, which way the wind's blowing, so that you can look at a point and say, well, these fish are probably going to be set up on this side of the point, out of the current, where they can catch things going over the point that are being blown across their heads. Bass have eyes on top of their head. They're made to feed up. For the most part, they're going to be sitting, looking up. They like, especially big bass, they like to suspend in cover and feed upwards. When they're feeding down, they're usually tilting themselves down so they can see and monitor bait that's on the bottom. But they're fish that's designed to feed upwards. So if you think about that, and you think about current, and you think about sunlight, and where's this fish going to hide? It's going to be in the shadows. It's going to be out of the current slightly, where it can position itself to grab things that are going by. And when I say current, I know you visualize moving water a lot of times. This can be the subtlest of things. A little breeze on a calm, otherwise calm day on a certain shoreline can be just enough surface current to generate a bite. There can be little things that work there that get, whatever food chain moving to get those fish feeding. So always look for that. That's always a key thing. Ways to stay in position. This is important in kayak fishing, especially if you're running a human-powered system, whether it be a paddle or pedal. You can drift off a spot very easy. You can move your bait off a spot very easily. A lot of times when you're fishing plastics and jigs and things like that, the best thing is to let that bait sit on the bottom and let the natural current of the water move those little appendages and whatnot on that bait. That's going to be the most natural looking presentation. Whether over moving the bait yourself or anything like that. Just cast it, let it sit there. A lot of times, if you're in an area where there's bass, they immediately see that bait hit the water, they come down to it, and they're sitting there staring at it. A lot of times, they'll just sit there and stare at it, and you'll reel your bait in, and you'll never get a bite, never know that they were there. If you let that bait sit there for a while, a lot longer than you think, I like to think of it as sit there until you can't stand it anymore, and then just sit there a little bit longer after that. But let that bait sit there, wait for that bite. If you're moving, it's very easy to drift off of a spot, move that bait away from the fish, and then not get that bite when you're kayak fishing. So using an anchor to position yourself, using a stakeout pole. One thing I do is I fish out of a Hobie, so I sit there and I pedal and I watch my rod tip and my line. And I keep the same arc of slack in my line so I can see if my kayak's moving at all. And I can adjust the direction that I'm pedaling into the wind or the current so that I know that my bait's not moving. I always keep that slack in my line because I know if that bait moves, I'm not giving it the right presentation that I want to give it. Another thing you can use is spot lock, you know, if you're running a trolling motor or something like that. But it's always crucial to have some form of something that you can tie off your kayak, like a RoboHawk or something like that. Something that you can hold yourself into place and make the right cast. That will dramatically change your catch rates. Power poles, there's a saying, some saying about power poles on a kayak tournament, like if your power pole's down, you're catching fish, whatever. There's a lot of truth to that. It's easy to move, especially in any kind of boat, keep moving, covering water. But a lot of times, put that power pole down, work an area good, try different angles, try different presentations, and think about it. You know, a lot of guys use live scope nowadays, and they can see this. You know, all these things I'm talking about, they're learning this because they literally pedal around and see these fish set up on different structures, and they can start to understand that. But it's something, if you're just aware of your surroundings and you know, pay attention to sunlight, you pay attention to the current, your shadow, the angle of your cast, what your bait's doing in the water as in relation to how those fish are probably gonna set up, you can know these things without ever using any sonar. I mean, these are just kind of basic concepts that hold true in bass fishing all of the time. And so just taking that position into mind as you're fishing all the time, especially during tournaments, is gonna improve your catch rates and the number of bites that you get tremendously, I believe. So, any questions about boat position? Chris Longshore.
So when you fish in a river system, would you rather do a float or go against the current up? Or when you do a float, do you turn around and then fish up a while and then float back down?
If I'm doing a float, I almost always turn around to a piece of cover that I see and like pedal back up to it, so I'm working into the current. And with river fishing, when you're talking about like largemouth bass, they like to get out of the current. So if you're fishing a river with a lot of current, look for eddies, which are, you know, the little areas where you got a bend in the river where the current pulls out and then makes a swirl around. This kind of holds bait and stuff in these areas, and it's a little bit easier for the bass to kind of stay back out of the slack water and hunt in these eddies. So eddies are another current related thing that you want to look for when you're fishing a river. But yeah, I never fish, when I'm floating down a river, I hardly ever just casting and floating, because I feel like you're not going to get the right angle or the presentation. So I'm always turning around, facing into the current, and then casting. Any other questions?
Do you find yourself anchoring a lot now that you get with the Hobie, or do you just find yourself you control it more with your?
Mostly just running my foot pedals. I do carry an anchor and a stakeout pole and a RoboHawk clip with me if I run into a scenario where I need it. And I'm about to get a motor too, so. But yeah, I just use my pedals mostly with the Hobie. It's pretty, unless it's really windy, you can stay in position pretty good, especially with the 360. And what I said earlier about watching your rod tip, like the wind's gonna push you this way and it's gonna push you that way. So with like the Hobie 360, you can sit there and make little micro adjustments on your pedal while you're fishing and keep yourself lined up with your rod so you know you're still on point.
Are you getting a motor to just to make like long runs on bigger lakes for like on the back, or are you gonna have a front mounted?
Right now, I think I'm gonna get a front mounted trolling motor, but I'm getting one. I'm kind of a traditionalist in the fact that I got into kayak fishing because I like the simplicity of it, and I don't like a lot of gear on my kayak. I like to just go out there with a fishing pole and no shoes and go catch fish. But I went to the Hobie tournament in Florida last week, and I thought I was launching from this unknown ramp and I was gonna be by myself, and I actually watched 40 other guys with motors go out into the lake before I got out there, and then I pedaled out there and tried to find a spot to fish. But that was eye-opening for me, because I'm like, if I'm gonna compete on these bigger lakes, now that motors are allowed, I'm gonna have to get a motor. So I'm getting one basically for tournament fishing to cover water and go to faraway spots that I probably couldn't pedal to. But mainly fishing around here, I'll probably just keep fishing with the pedal drive, and that's it.
What's the best anchoring system that you would recommend to someone that doesn't have one?
Honestly, I like the old school system that we used to do. We used to get like a retractable dog leash and then just hook a bell anchor or a claw anchor to it and drop it off the side, which is just simplicity, and it works.
A lot cheaper.
Yeah. I do recommend, in a lot of scenarios, kind of like anchoring off running like a pulley system so you can anchor off the front of your kayak.
Do you do anything specific with your anchor to keep it from getting hung up?
No, I don't. I do use a claw anchor, and sometimes I've had it get hung up. I will say this, for people that are getting into a kayak as their first form of any boat, do not throw an anchor out in a river where there's a lot of current, because you're going to have troubles. So that's a dangerous thing. One thing you can do, people like to use those old window weights, and I think they make like some like sort of nylon weight, like, I don't know, like long tube weights that you can get for kayak fishing that are like snagless, so you can kind of like drag fish those. But
So how many rod and reel setups do you use on a competitive tournament when you go out?
lately I've been using 5 or 6 bait casters and 2 to 3 spinning rods. So I just try to have enough for every presentation that I want to possibly use on that lake or whatever. But the pro angler, I don't like having a bunch of rods sticking up behind me because of trees and casting and whatnot. So my pro angler's got 6 rod holders inside, so I usually put all the bait casters inside, and then I'll put a couple spinning rods on the back if I need them, and just run like that. Any other questions? You guys can ask me anything you want to ask me. Well, maybe.
What's your PB?
Personal best bass. For Nebraska, my personal best bass is 23.75. That was caught out of the farm pond. And my personal best bass outside of Nebraska is also 23.75, which was caught in Lake Fork, Texas. My biggest bass weight-wise that I've ever caught weighed 9 pounds 3 ounces and was caught in Iowa, right up the river at Blue Lake. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but that lake used to have some really big fish in it, and they had a one-eyed giant in there that the bass clubs caught all the time. And they weighed it like, I don't know, a month before I caught it, and it was like 9.3, and then I caught it after that. And that fish was only 22 inches. So,
Football.
yeah.
You've been to a lot of lakes around. What's your favorite lake?
In Nebraska, or
Just all over.
My favorite lake used to be Kentucky Lake. It had a huge population of big offshore bass, largemouth and smallmouth, and you could go out there and catch like 5 to 7 pound bass all day long in the right conditions. That lake has changed. I think it'll come back to that someday. I also like Lake Fork. If you haven't been down there, it's a very traditional looking bass lake. I mean, it's like I don't know what I'm looking for. It's like the perfect bass lake, the quintessential bass lake. But it's got all kinds of cover and docks and stuff, and it's got these big old nasty mean largemouth that have been caught like 25 times, and they hate you, you know, and they try to break everything in your kayak and break your life and everything else. But that's just a fun lake to go down there, and it's always a challenge. And Tyler's been down there and caught some big fish. Yeah. But that lake's pretty awesome. In Nebraska, I like to fish bird turtle a lot. That lake can be pretty tough, but it's got some big bass in it if you know how to get them and get there the right time of year. And then I like to go out west to Red Willow and like Marriott. I like those western lakes out there. A lot of little lakes in between, like Prairie View up in Omaha is a pretty good little bass lake. Wingspan's got some big fish in it. Summit up by where I live got a nice population of good fish in it. And then the river is a good place to go up there and do a different style of fishing, catch smallmouth up there. Those are probably my favorite spots.
One bait for the rest of your life. What are you throwing?
If I had to choose one bait, I think everybody would, or a lot of people would know that it'd probably be the jig. I'm a big jig guy, because it's just, I like to fish the swim jig a lot. It's versatile. I can fish on the top, on the bottom. I always catch a fish on it. That's the one bait all year long. It'd be 40 degrees or 90 degrees and you're gonna catch fish on it. I also like to throw frogs a lot, big worms. Getting more into the swim baits, glide bait thing. I'm a super obsessive kind of person, so when I get into things, I kind of like really get into them, so I kind of gotta watch myself sometimes, and the swim bait world is something that it's like that shiny thing on the shelf, and I see it and I'm like, ooh, I want that really bad, but I also don't know if I want to get like completely immersed in that yet, but
they get really expensive.
Right, yeah. And I already spent enough on baits, so. But yeah, probably a G.
All good?
Yeah. Just doing some questions. Any other questions?
So when you go to like a national tournament and you do a big trip like that, how many days do you spend practicing before the actual tournament?
In the past, I used to go down there like a week early, and I would spend a whole week catching big fish, wearing myself out, burning up all my spots, and then when the tournament got there, I would be completely worn out, and there'd be hardly any fish left in my spots. Not really, but sometimes.
Yeah.
But so nowadays, I don't really care about pre-fishing so much. Sometimes I just want to hit stuff fresh and kind of rely on knowledge of fish movements and seasonal patterns and say, this is a likely spot, this is a likely spot, and then just go hit those spots blind. Because when you fish something fresh for the first time, I think you give it your best shot, kind of. Whereas if you pre-fish an area and then you go back there, I personally have a problem with like trying to repeat history, like make that same cast that I caught one on or fish that same bait, and not being as adaptive to the situation. If I hit it fresh, then I'm thinking about what's going on right now, like what's going on today, what are these fish doing, and then I have to figure that out. And I usually do a little bit better. That's a big lesson that I've learned over years and years of like failure at proper pre-fishing and saying, hey, I don't need to know that there's fish here. I just need to understand that there are probably fish here, and I can go catch them and not go mess with them the day before. Yeah, so if I go to the Sam Rayburn tournament that's coming up, I'm trying to find out if I'm going. I'm planning on going down there not pre-fishing at all and just seeing what happens and saving my energy for the tournament and relying on what I know.
But you fished that lake before?
No.
That'd be kind of a interesting thing to line fish something a lake that big for the
Yeah.
first time.
All good? Let's give a big hand, guys.